You listed my house without telling me? Sylvia, 71, stood at the open house her daughter-in-law had planned. Lisa blinked. You weren't using the space. I live here, Sylvia said coldly, and I own it. Gasps spread across the room as Sylvia handed out flyers, deed enclosed. My backyard, my home, my turn. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The sound of wine glasses clinking wasn't the strange part. It was that none of them clinked with hers. The laughter came before the door even closed behind her. Sylvia paused in the foyer, holding a canvas tote streaked with clay from her pottery class. Her fingers were stiff, still powdered with the earthy scent of wet porcelain, but that wasn't what made her hands tremble. Through the narrow hallway and into the kitchen, the back window framed a scene that didn't belong to her, or maybe not anymore. Her backyard, her rose-laced pergola, her stone path, her husband's teak bench, was brimming with people she didn't recognize. A glossy white banner flapped in the breeze above the patio. Summer Garden Bash, hosted by Lisa and Jeff Hammond. Her heart skipped, then thudded hard against her ribs. She moved closer to the glass, watching a woman in a wide-brimmed hat set down a tray of shrimp cocktails on the table she once used for planting bulbs. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else spilled rosé and shouted playfully for more. And her daughter-in-law, Lisa, all dressed in blush and pearls, was in the center of it all, glowing, sipping, playing hostess with practiced ease. Sylvia blinked slowly. No one had said a word about this. Not Jeff, her son, not Lisa, and certainly not any of the grandkids. She tried to recall if maybe she'd forgotten, missed an email, but there'd been nothing. Not a call, not a message. Her hand reached for the back door before her mind fully decided to open it. The hinge creaked as she stepped out onto the deck. A breeze lifted the edges of her cotton cardigan. The music didn't pause. The laughter didn't fade. It was like she'd walked into a television set someone had left running. Only now, she was in the wrong episode. Lisa turned halfway toward her, locking eyes for a moment, her smile barely stretched. "Oh," she said in a light, dismissive tone, as if Sylvia had wandered into someone else's picnic. "Hi, Sylvia." Then she turned back to her group, clinking glasses with a man in a salmon polo. Sylvia glanced toward the patio chairs. Hers, the one with the embroidered cushion she'd used every spring since Roger died, was gone. In its place stood a fold-out bar cart. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned and stepped back inside, the sliding door clicking shut behind her. The air felt colder indoors, heavy with silence and lemon oil from the cleaned counters. Her hand went instinctively to the upper cabinet where she kept the good champagne. Empty. The cabinet was bare save for a half-used bottle of balsamic vinegar and two mismatched flutes. She opened the fridge. No cold cuts, no brie, no punch bowl. She wasn't sure what she had expected to find, but it wasn't this. Emptiness. Absence by design. She stood still, letting the house press its quiet around her. Then, without really knowing why, she stepped to the front door and opened the mailbox. Among circulars and credit offers, a cream-colored envelope caught her eye. Her name, handwritten in a rushed script, Sylvia Hammond. She slid it open. Inside was an invitation. Summer Garden Bash, hosted by Lisa and Jeff Hammond. Join us for food, friends, and sunshine. The postmark on the envelope read yesterday's date. Sylvia closed the door, sat down at the kitchen table, and placed the invitation in front of her like it might start explaining itself. She stared at it for a long time, long enough for the wind outside to carry a burst of laughter through the window again, the kind that used to come from her. She slid the envelope aside, stood slowly, and walked to the study. The filing cabinet creaked open. Tomorrow she'd begin where they never thought she'd look. When you rent your mother-in-law's backyard, you'd better check who holds the keys. The voices drifted through the cracked bedroom window, bright, polished, and full of entitlement. Sylvia had left the sliding door shut this time, but it didn't matter. Laughter traveled, especially when it wasn't meant to include you. From her bedroom upstairs, she could hear Lisa's unmistakable tone rising like steam from a pot, chipper, assertive, and meant to be overheard. "We're thinking of fully renovating this place," Lisa said to a cluster of well-dressed guests, Open up the yard, add a fire pit maybe, or even a plunge pool. It has so much potential if you look past the dated bits. Sylvia's knuckles tightened on the windowsill. Dated bits? The azaleas had been planted by hand. The old lemon tree? Raised from seed. Even the stepping stones Roger had laid them himself on a cold April morning, sleeves rolled up, saying, "Every inch of this yard belongs to someone who knew what to do with it." She stepped back from the window, the echo of his voice following her down the hall like a low current. In the quiet hum of her study, she opened the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk and pulled out the leather-bound folder she hadn't touched in years. The paper inside crackled as she turned the pages, looking for what she knew was there. It still bore the ink of a notary from 20 years ago. Title deed, 1432 Willow Ridge Drive. Owner, Sylvia Hammond. There it was. No amendments, no transfers, no co-signers. Her name alone. She let out a long, slow breath, the kind that settled somewhere below anger. A flash of memory came uninvited. Roger, on the back porch one summer evening, handing her a pen and a thick envelope. "This house stays in your name," he'd said. "Promise me, never sign anything under pressure. You get to keep this, especially if I go first." He had gone first, but not without making sure she had the last word if she ever needed it. The hallway light flickered on behind her. She turned just as Jeff leaned on the doorframe, tie loosened, cheeks flushed. "Hey," he said casually, as if they'd just run into each other at the grocery store. "About the party. Sorry we didn't loop you in. Lisa kinda handles the social stuff. You know how it is." Sylvia said nothing, only looked at him, and then at the thin sheen of sweat on his temple. He gave an awkward laugh, backing away. "Anyway, hope you're having a good night." When she stepped outside later to bring in the mail, her eye caught something subtle but telling. The nameplate on the shared mailbox had changed. Where once it had read Hammond Sylvia, it now read simply Hammond, Jeff, and Lisa. No room left for her name, not even a hyphen. Back inside, she lit a single candle in the study, the waxy scent of vanilla curling up around her as she opened the file drawer again. One by one, she removed every official record, deed, utility confirmations, tax assessments. She copied them all neatly into a new folder. No labels, no flair, just quiet proof. Each paper slid into place with the satisfying sound of dignity being restored. Then she picked up her phone and typed a single line to the one person who had stood by her since Roger's funeral. "Marianne, tea this week? My treat. Bring your lawyer brain." She placed the phone face down, walked to the kitchen and poured the last of the untouched lemonade into a crystal glass. In the distance, another round of laughter erupted. Sylvia didn't flinch. Instead, she turned on the patio light. Not for them, but for herself. Lisa smiled like a host greeting a stranger at a restaurant, not a woman living down the hall. The scent of cinnamon toast drifted down the hallway, mingling with the sharp hiss of an espresso machine. Sylvia padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tile cool beneath her feet. Lisa stood at the island in crisp white linen, plating croissants like she was hosting a food segment. She didn't turn. "Morning," Lisa said brightly, without looking up. "There's coffee in the pot." She slid a single mug across the counter toward Sylvia. No sugar, no cream, not the floral mug Sylvia always used. Just a plain white cup, set like a placeholder. Sylvia stood for a moment, waiting to be invited to sit, but Lisa had already turned her back, too absorbed in arranging napkins. Jeff entered a second later, still in slippers, flipping through his phone. "Hey," he mumbled, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table. "So, I was thinking, if we finish up the guest suite this week, we can show it off during the next brunch." Sylvia lowered herself into the corner armchair, spine straight. "Which suite?" Jeff didn't look up. Lisa answered for him, her voice smooth as clinking ice. "Just the back wing, needs an update, paint, trim, maybe built-ins." The back wing, her room. The space where she kept her sewing machine, her late husband's letters, and the record player that still worked if you nudged the stylus just right. Sylvia took a long sip of black coffee, bitter on her tongue. "I wasn't aware we were finishing anything." Lisa smiled across the kitchen like they were sharing a polite joke. "You've just been so busy lately. Pottery, book club. We figured we'd handle the house stuff." Sylvia didn't respond. The toast popped. Jeff grabbed it. After they left for the gym, another thing Sylvia hadn't been invited to, she wandered into the garage. The scent of motor oil and cardboard was oddly comforting, until she noticed the boxes. 4 of them, taped and labeled Jeff Office, Jeff Tools, Jeff Books, and a final one, marked in Lisa's handwriting, Living Room, Misk. Sylvia stared at the boxes for a long time. She thought of the couch they'd just reupholstered together last winter, the lamp Roger had bought at a yard sale and fixed up with her. All of it now being sorted and sectioned off. Later that night, she walked past the dining room to find Lisa's laptop open and glowing. The screensaver hadn't kicked in, just a bright inbox with a bold headline, Backyard Venue, quote, 75 guests confirmed below it. Subject, property transfer steps. Timeline confirmation. Her breath caught. Sylvia glanced down the hallway, no footsteps. She slid the USB key from her drawer and clicked it into place. The drive icon appeared, the files copied in silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew the drive, careful not to close anything, not to leave a fingerprint. She stood in the hallway afterward, the lights dimmed, the house still smelling faintly of cinnamon and cruelty. The documents now lived in her pocket. Sylvia walked to the window and looked out at the backyard, her backyard. The rose bushes were blooming. The lanterns still hung from last summer's gathering. No one had taken them down. They flickered now like ghost lights. She didn't cry, didn't rage, just let the silence do what it did best, clear the air. Then she spoke, just once, a whisper to no one. Let them host one more party. She brushed her fingers along the countertop like a piano and added, I'll pour the wine myself. Do you want to scare them or surprise them? Marianne asked. Sylvia just smiled. The teacup rattled slightly in Sylvia's hand, not from nerves, but from the vibration of truths finally shifting into place. The cafe was a quiet one, tucked between a florist and a shuttered bookstore, the kind of place that still served tea and porcelain, and remembered your name if you came often enough. Sylvia sat across from Marianne Whitlow, her old friend of 30 years, and, more importantly, an estate lawyer with a sharp mind and a long memory. Marianne stirred her chamomile with slow circles. All right, Syl, lay it out, all of it. Sylvia opened her leather-bound folder and slid over the contents one by one. Photos of the brunch invitation with her name absent, screenshots of emails titled Property Transfer Steps, the guest spreadsheet with a column titled Owner's Table, and finally, a printed deed showing Sylvia Hammond as sole owner of the property, untouched, unaltered since the day Roger died. Marianne adjusted her reading glasses, eyes narrowing. You said you haven't signed anything in 8 years? Not even the holiday cards, Sylvia replied, voice flat but steady. Lisa said she'd handle the mailing list. I thought she meant stamps. And this email, Marianne said, tapping the one titled Notarized Template Draft. You saw this open on Lisa's laptop? Twice, same subject line, different sender the second time. Marianne set down her cup with the finality of a gavel. They're preparing to fake a transfer, probably assuming you won't notice until it's done, or won't live long enough to reverse it. Sylvia's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled around the porcelain rim until her knuckles paled. Marianne leaned forward, voice low and firm. We're going to reaffirm the deed today. We'll file a property freeze, quietly. That blocks any transfer or sale until it's reviewed by the registrar. Sylvia nodded once, like she'd already made peace with what needed to be done. I also want to revisit my trust. Marianne raised an eyebrow. You still have it set as revocable. Not anymore. Sylvia's tone was soft, almost affectionate. Let's make it irrevocable. Marianne blinked, then smiled slowly. You're not just guarding it. You're sealing the vault. Sylvia looked out the window at the breeze swaying the florist's wind chime. They've mistaken my silence for surrender. I'd just like to correct that. The rest of the meeting passed in quiet steps that carried weight. Signatures filed, digital records scanned, and a notarized amendment added to her will. By the end of the hour, the house was no longer just Sylvia's. It was protected, shielded by legal armor neither Jeff nor Lisa could penetrate without setting off alarms in every courthouse within the county. As they stood outside, Marianne hugged her briefly. "If you ever want me in the room when you confront them—" "No," Sylvia interrupted gently. "They'll be too loud for you. But thank you." Back home, she walked through her own hallway with new eyes. The pictures Lisa had rehung crooked, the guest towels in her closet that she hadn't folded, the wine glasses she hadn't used in years, all tiny erasures. They hadn't pushed her out with force. They had diluted her presence, drop by quiet drop. But now the tide was turning. That night, Sylvia stood at her desk and opened a fresh folder labeled Transition. Inside, she slid a copy of her new trust document. The final line read, "Beneficiaries, none declared at this time." She'd leave it blank for now. Let that silence ring. The house was now locked inside a protected trust, permanent, binding, and invisible to the ones trying to steal it. And in a choice no one saw coming, Sylvia left her family off the paper, work entirely. She clicked the folder shut and placed it gently back into her drawer, whispering, "Now let's see who asks to borrow the key." Sylvia didn't need a revenge plan. She just needed a calendar and her kitchen timer. The flyer arrived not through the mail, but via a friend's awkward chuckle at the grocery store. It was posted on the neighborhood corkboard between an ad for piano lessons and a missing cat. Sylvia's fingers hovered over the glossy paper, printed with marigold accents and cursive script. Harvest Brunch, a seasonal celebration. Hosted by Lisa and Jeff Hammond. Her jaw didn't clench. Her lips didn't twitch. She simply plucked the flyer from the board, folded it twice, perfect creases, and slid it into her canvas tote, right between a bag of jasmine rice and a box of chamomile tea. The words didn't hurt. They didn't even sting. But they did settle, like sediment in a glass, confirming what she'd already known. They weren't just encroaching. They were erasing. Back in her kitchen, she set the flyer on the counter beside her old egg timer, the one with faded numbers and a squeaky twist. She wound it to 15 minutes and poured herself a cup of lukewarm tea. By the time the bell rang, Sylvia had made 3 phone calls and reclaimed the day. Her first call was to the catering company listed on the flyer. The woman on the other end cheerfully confirmed the brunch was scheduled for Sunday at her address. "Wonderful," Sylvia said with equal warmth. "Please schedule a tasting at that location on the same day. Make the reservation under Sylvia Hammond." The homeowner. There was a brief pause, then a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." Next came the wine distributor. Sylvia inquired whether the shipment had been confirmed. "Oh, yes. Your daughter-in-law requested—" "I'll be receiving the delivery myself," Sylvia said evenly. "Please note that on the order." She finished her tea slowly, as if savoring not the flavor, but the silence that followed boldness. That afternoon, Lisa received the first confusing call. The catering assistant politely asked if it was still okay for Sylvia Hammond to host the wine tasting during the brunch event. Sylvia happened to be trimming her roses nearby and hummed a soft tune when Lisa glanced at her with narrowed eyes. "Did you change the plans?" Lisa asked as soon as they were inside. "No," Sylvia replied. "But I thought it best to make myself available, seeing as the event is being held on my lawn." Lisa crossed her arms. "You could have talked to us." Sylvia tilted her head. "You could have invited me." Later that evening, Jeff tried to broker peace with his usual shrug and a beer in hand. "Look, Lisa's just trying to do something fun for the neighborhood. She didn't mean any harm." "I know," Sylvia said gently, "but she did mean to ignore me. There's a difference." The next morning, she polished her silverware and ironed a set of gold-trimmed cloth napkins, items stored away since her husband's memorial 5 years earlier. She unpacked the hand-painted china with garden motifs, each plate bordered in deep green vines. They still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. She arranged the tables herself, placing each chair intentionally, carefully, not out of vengeance, but reverence. Her garden deserved dignity. So did she. When the florist arrived, Lisa was home and intercepted the delivery, asking if it was a mistake. "Not at all," the florist replied. "It's for Mrs. Hammond. She's hosting a private event." Lisa stepped into the sunroom to find Sylvia seated at the head of the table with reading glasses perched on her nose. In front of her sat a printed spreadsheet with names and seating assignments. Sylvia looked up, pen still in hand. "I'm finalizing the layout," she said casually. "There's an owner's table now." Lisa's eyes dropped to the page, where, next to a highlighted cell, Sylvia had added a handwritten note, pending guest approval or removal. On the day of the brunch, Sylvia dressed like she was hosting royalty, because she was. The morning sun spilled across the garden in amber streaks, softening the crisp edges of the trimmed hedges and making the dew on the roses glint like tiny glass beads. In her bedroom, Sylvia stood in front of the mirror fastening a vintage brooch to the collar of her silk blouse. It was an heirloom, deep gold with a citrine stone in the center. Her late husband had given it to her after she completed her first tax season as a self-employed accountant decades ago. She hadn't worn it in years, but today felt like ceremony. Downstairs, she opened the box of silver serving trays and polished each one slowly, her cotton gloves lifting away the haze of storage. The house smelled of lavender oil and toasted bread. She'd arranged a breakfast delivery for the early kitchen helpers. They arrived one by one, each greeted with warmth, a thank you, and clear instructions. Treat the guests kindly. But if they had questions about who was in charge, just point to the woman in gold. By 10, folding chairs lined the freshly edged lawn. White linens kissed the tips of the grass, and crystal glasses shimmered in the light. A soft jazz trio tuned up under the magnolia tree. A handwritten sign by the gate read, "Welcome to the Harvest Brunch, a garden rooted in memory." At exactly 10:15, Lisa arrived. She wore a muted blush-wrapped dress and a tight smile. Her eyes flicked across the crowd, searching for familiar allies, but most of the guests had come because of Sylvia's quiet invitations. Neighbors, former students, church friends, even Sylvia's old bridge partner who now walked with a cane. Sylvia was already mingling when Lisa spotted her, standing near the buffet, her brooch catching the light like a miniature sun. "You look radiant," Lisa said through clenched teeth. Sylvia smiled. "Thank you. Gold suits me. It's earned, not bought." Before Lisa could respond, the trio struck up a soft Ella Fitzgerald number, and the clinking of glasses began. A few guests approached Sylvia with surprise and delight, many unaware she still lived there. "I thought Lisa and Jeff owned this place now," someone whispered. Sylvia gently shook her head. "I've just been letting others enjoy the garden, but it's always been mine." Jeff attempted a shift in tone by queuing up a slideshow presentation on a projector screen. "Just a little something to show our journey here," he announced. The screen lit up with photos, home renovations, garden parties, baby showers. Then unexpectedly an older image appeared, a sepia-toned photograph of Sylvia and her husband standing proudly in front of the house with a sold sign. Her hand was on his chest. The deed was in hers. The room hushed. Lisa leaned close and hissed, "You're embarrassing yourself." Sylvia didn't flinch. "No," she said softly. "I'm reminding you." Dessert was served soon after, a selection of lemon tarts and miniature cakes on silver trays. As servers passed out glasses of champagne, guests noticed the custom labels. Sylvia Hammond Reserve. Established 1981. Gasps turned into laughter, then admiration. A woman in her 60s leaned in and said, "You're a legend, Sylvia." "I'm just home," she replied. She walked to the center of the garden, gently raised her glass, and addressed the crowd. "Thank you for being here, on this land, in this season, with this history. This garden grew from love, sweat, and old roots. And for those who remember where the roots lie, thank you." A warm hush followed. Even Lisa didn't interrupt. Sylvia's hand didn't tremble as she lifted the flute higher. Her voice was steady, clear. "To what's truly mine." The only thing Sylvia served colder than the rosé was the envelope. The brunch was in full swing, champagne fizzing in flute glasses and forks clinking gently over quiche and chilled melon. Sunlight spilled through the trimmed arbor into the yard, where guests lingered over conversation and compliments. Sylvia, standing by the drink table, wore a calm smile as steady as a heartbeat. She watched Lisa glide between groups, that performative graciousness in full bloom, chin tilted, dress flowing like she was the undisputed hostess of this garden kingdom. Then came the moment. Sylvia stepped onto the cobblestone patio with 2 cream-colored envelopes held delicately on a silver tray. No announcement, no drama, just a graceful walk toward Lisa and Jeff, who were mid-sentence with a city councilman's wife. "Excuse me," Sylvia said, her voice clear but unforced. "These are for you." Lisa blinked as she took one. Jeff reached for the other. Their names were handwritten in calligraphy across the front, flourished, elegant, unmistakably final. They opened the envelopes in sync. A flicker of confusion, then Lisa's jaw clenched. Her eyes darted down the page. Jeff turned pale, lips parting but no sound escaping. Lisa looked up, her voice caught in her throat. "This is... you're evicting us?" "Correct," Sylvia replied, with the serenity of someone who had practiced this moment down to the breath. "You have 30 days to vacate your guest residency, as per the original agreement you never read," Jeff sputtered. "You can't do this without talking to us first." "I just did," Sylvia said evenly. She smiled and folded her hands before her, the brooch on her collar glinting gold in the sun. A hush rippled through the guests nearby. Conversation paused mid-sentence. A few leaned in. Some whispered. Others glanced around, gauging whether this was theater or real life unraveling before their eyes. Lisa's fingers crushed the notice in her palm, crinkling the elegant paper like tissue. "You waited until today? In front of everyone?" Sylvia didn't answer. She simply turned toward the DJ, who stood uncertainly beside his speakers, one hand hovering over the playlist. She lifted a hand. "Can we shift the mood?" she asked gently. The DJ nodded and pressed play. The speakers pulsed to life with a slow, mellow jazz number, Billie Holiday. A's "I'll Be Seeing You." It was her late husband's favorite. The tune curled into the air like incense, softening the tension just enough for people to breathe again. Sylvia moved to refill her drink, her gold-trimmed glass catching the light as she poured. Behind her, Lisa stood frozen. Jeff leaned in, muttering under his breath before grabbing his phone and disappearing into the house. Inside, his voice echoed from the open kitchen window. "You don't understand. She's serious. I don't think there's anything we can do. We're screwed, Nate. We're absolutely—" The window slammed shut. Outside, Sylvia let her eyes wander over the garden, the azaleas blooming, the tablecloths billowing, the neighbors sipping their drinks a little more carefully now. She made her way to a pair of longtime friends near the trellis who greeted her with knowing smiles. "She really thought you wouldn't," whispered one of them. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. "They really thought I couldn't." And just like that, the party carried on. But it was clear the air had changed. Inside the house, Jeff's voice lowered to a panicked whisper. Sylvia, still smiling, took another sip of rosé as the wind shifted toward her side of the yard. Lisa packed up leftover scones. Sylvia packed up the guest room lease. The morning after the brunch, the house had that distinct post-party hush, where everything looked just a bit too still, too clean, as if even the silence had been scrubbed for appearances. Sylvia stood by the kitchen sink rinsing out the last champagne flutes, the cold water running over her hands like a quiet reset. The light coming through the window cast a dappled gold pattern on the counter, sunlight through old trees and older windows. Behind her, Lisa moved like someone pretending not to be watched. She collected napkins with twitchy hands, wiped a spotless table, and packed leftover pastries into reused bakery boxes. Every movement screamed avoidance disguised as helpfulness. The air between them was thick with the words Sylvia had not yet said, but would. "I think," Lisa started, placing the scone boxes near the fridge, "we should talk. Just, to get on the same page about living arrangements, maybe about boundaries." Sylvia didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply dried her hands on a linen cloth and turned slowly. "Of course," she said, reaching calmly for the folder she had placed on the kitchen island earlier that morning. "This should help." She slid the folder across to Lisa, who hesitated before opening it. Inside, printed neatly on official letterhead, was a revised lease agreement, updated, notarized, and filed. Lisa blinked. I'm not on it, she whispered, scanning the pages as if the ink might rearrange itself. You never were, Sylvia said evenly. This house belongs to me. Jeff's residency was tied to a former lease. It expired 3 years ago. You were never legally listed, not even as a guest. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Jeff appeared in his slippers, rubbing sleep from his eyes and carrying a half-empty mug of cold coffee. What's this? He asked, walking over. Your wife thought we should talk about boundaries, Sylvia said, folding her hands. I agreed. Jeff glanced at the papers, brows furrowing. But we helped with upgrades, the stone path, the lighting, the garden shed, none of which were permitted, Sylvia said coolly, and none of which gave you legal standing. Jeff exhaled sharply, shaking his head. So this is about punishing us. Sylvia gave him a long look. This is about putting things back where they belong. That afternoon, Sylvia stepped into her backyard like someone walking into her own name. The azaleas near the shed were in bloom, thick pink blossoms that had never failed her. She traced a finger gently along one bloom before turning to the man beside her. The appraiser adjusted his clipboard, eyes scanning the landscape. You've done a beautiful job keeping this property intact, he said. Original brick, mature landscaping, full southern exposure. The zoning still single occupancy? About to be locked in, Sylvia said. I've submitted the request through my attorney. He nodded approvingly and made another note. You've maintained this as a true home. More than some ever intended it to be, she replied. Inside the house, Marianne sat in the den, tapping through city forms and deed archives on her tablet. She'd brought 2 mugs of tea, one now half empty, the other untouched. Once the zoning update goes through, she said, not looking up, they won't be able to legally alter anything, let alone turn it into a multi-residency rental. Sylvia nodded, steady. Good. I want it in stone, not whispers. Meanwhile, Lisa had taken to spending long hours on her phone, researching rentals, making polite inquiries that ended quickly once she mentioned the address. Everyone knew who the house belonged to now, and few wanted to cross a woman who could evict with grace and smile while doing it. Lat. Component placement. As Sylvia watered her hanging petunias, she heard it through the screen door. Lisa, in the hallway, voice tight with desperation. She's ruining everything, just like she always does. Sylvia didn't react. She tilted the watering can gently, letting the droplets fall like applause onto the soil. That phrase, once a weapon, now rang like an anthem. Sylvia overhears Lisa muttering on the phone. She's ruining everything, just like she always does. Sylvia didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just canceled the Wi-Fi subscription. The next morning, Lisa opened her laptop at the kitchen table, pressed the spacebar, and waited. Nothing. She refreshed the browser 3 times before sighing loudly enough to echo through the open-plan living room. Jeff, she called. Did you mess with the modem again? Jeff, still in sweatpants and socks, rubbed his eyes as he wandered in. I haven't touched anything. It was working last night. Sylvia passed behind them silently, teacup in hand, heading toward the sunroom where her ivy plants caught the morning light just so. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. An hour later, the grocery delivery didn't arrive. Lisa paced near the front door, clutching her phone. I got a confirmation email, she said, and now it says the order was canceled. Maybe it's a glitch, Jeff offered weakly, holding his phone toward the ceiling like that would summon a signal. Do you have bars? I'm not getting any Wi-Fi. Sylvia stood at the dining hutch with her back to them, adjusting the placement of her late husband's photo. It leaned slightly to the right. She straightened it with delicate precision. Is the Wi-Fi down? Lisa asked, stepping closer. I canceled it, Sylvia said calmly, still not turning. You... what? Lisa's voice shot up a half octave. You canceled the whole thing? Sylvia turned now, her tone even. It was under my name, as are the utilities, the grocery subscriptions, and the delivery accounts. She paused. I updated everything yesterday. Why? Jeff asked, clearly bewildered. Are you trying to push us out? Not trying, Sylvia replied. There was no triumph in her voice. Only fact. Lisa's face flushed red, confusion giving way to rage. "You're doing this to punish us," she said. "This is spiteful." Sylvia simply tilted her head, as if considering whether the accusation merited a response. Then, as if the whole conversation had cost her nothing, she turned and walked away, her slippered steps soft against the hardwood floor. In the afternoon, a locksmith arrived. Sylvia offered him a lemon scone and a pitcher of cold water before pointing to the front and side doors. "Just a precaution," she said kindly. "A security update." The man nodded, professional but clearly amused. "You'd be surprised how often this happens. Ownership gets forgotten. But the locks remember." As the technician worked, Lisa stood by the hallway stairs, arms folded, disbelief etched into her features. "Is this even legal?" she hissed. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. "Every lock, every form, every letter of it." The locksmith smiled as he snapped the final deadbolt into place. "That should do it, ma'am." That evening, the house was quieter than it had been in weeks. No television humming in the background, no clattering of takeout boxes. Even the refrigerator hummed more clearly without the buzz of chargers and routers and arguments. Sylvia sat in her study with the door slightly ajar. The light from the desk lamp was soft, amber-colored, and cast long, peaceful shadows. She reached into the second drawer on the left and pulled out a worn leather journal, her husband's. She hadn't opened it in a while. The pages were stiff, but the handwriting was strong, inked with clarity. A man who spoke in numbers but wrote with heart. She flipped to the last entry. The date, March 3rd, 2011, the last week before the hospital. The entry was short. "If they begin to chip at the house at your name, at your place, don't let them take your silence as surrender. Use it as a step. One step back, then forward. Take back what they chip away from you." Sylvia closed the journal gently and placed her palm on its cover, eyes steady but glistening. It ends with, "Take back what they chip away from you." Lisa didn't expect her mother-in-law to show up at the open house, with cupcakes. The "for sale" sign appeared on a Tuesday morning, its white post stark against Sylvia's green lawn. She blinked at it from her kitchen window, not quite believing. The swing tag below it read, "Open house this Saturday, 1 to 4 p.m. Sylvia set down her teacup without finishing it. Her breath was calm, her fingers, not so much. She hadn't authorized a sale. She hadn't even been asked. By Thursday, the flyers had made it to her own mailbox, bold text, listing the home as a lovingly upgraded multi-generational estate. A small line near the bottom credited Lisa Hammond as the contact person. Not Jeff and Lisa, just Lisa. Sylvia smiled. The kind of smile no one sees until it's already too late. Saturday arrived with sunshine. Sylvia pulled a tray of lemon cupcakes from the oven and let them cool while she changed into a soft lavender blouse and pearl earrings. She pinned her silver hair into a neat chignon and slid the tray into a basket lined with embroidered cloth. At 1:06 p.m., she walked around the block and entered through the side gate, humming. There were already 6 cars in the driveway and 2 parked illegally near the hydrant. Sylvia noticed it all as she approached the front door like any curious neighbor might. Inside, the house didn't feel like hers. A jazz playlist played from someone's Bluetooth speaker. Fresh-cut peonies, none from her own garden, stood on the foyer table. Lisa had replaced the framed wedding photo of Sylvia and her husband with a generic art print of sunflowers. "Hi there!" Lisa's voice was sugar-dipped, syrupy. "Come in, come in." Sylvia smiled sweetly, holding up the basket. "Thought I'd bring some cupcakes. It's not every day I see strangers in my own foyer." Lisa's smile froze. "Sylvia, you weren't supposed to. We're just showcasing the space." Before Lisa could intercept her, Sylvia turned to the prospective buyers with warm hospitality. "I've lived here for 42 years, she said, voice rich and even. "Baked 1,000 things in that kitchen, hosted 7 Thanksgivings, and planted every rose out back myself." A man near the doorway blinked. "You still live here?" Sylvia nodded. "I'm the deed holder. Full title. My name is on the documents, not Lisa's." The realtor, a young woman in patent heels and a panicked smile, looked visibly thrown. I was told this property was co-owned. It's not, Sylvia interrupted gently. Lisa never had signing authority. She's never been a co-owner. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope. Here's a copy of the deed, she said, handing a few flyers to those nearest. And just to clarify, this home is not for sale. Lisa's face went bloodless. You're ruining our lives. Sylvia turned slowly, something in her spine straightening. You tried to erase me, she said. I'm just restoring the picture. The room buzzed with uncomfortable energy. 2 guests quietly slipped out. The realtor excused herself to take a call, though the phone hadn't rung. Lisa stood frozen, lips parted, as if hunting for a comeback. But Sylvia wasn't done. Later that evening, after the last car pulled away and Lisa had slammed a door upstairs, Sylvia wandered into the garage to check on her laundry. As she passed the side shelf, where Jeff once kept his camping gear, she noticed something strange. 2 folders labeled Short-Term Lease Agreements, Garden Room, and Studio Back Sublet. Sylvia frowned. She opened one and scanned the contents. Signed documents, rental agreements, payment logs. They were renting out parts of her home, without her consent, without her knowledge. Her eyes narrowed, her breath deepened, but it wasn't rage, it was clarity. She picked up the folders and walked slowly to the kitchen. There, beneath the golden light of the antique lamp her husband had installed, she opened her ledger and began taking notes. Lisa had been collecting rent under the table, illegally from at least 2 tenants. Sylvia circled a date on her calendar. Time to make a few official calls, she murmured. And maybe a visit from code enforcement. The only thing worse than losing your place is finding out it was never yours to offer. The knock on the door came just after 9 a.m. Firm, rhythmic, and official. Not the kind of knock that asked permission, the kind that stated presence. Sylvia opened the front door slowly, revealing a city inspector in a navy jacket, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the property before he even introduced himself. Good morning. Code enforcement. I received a report regarding unauthorized subletting on this property. Sylvia stepped aside. You're right on time. From the living room, Lisa appeared, barefoot, hair undone, clearly expecting a package. Not a government official. Can I help you? She asked, masking surprise with faux cheer. The inspector turned a page on his clipboard. We've received documentation of short-term rental activity occurring in areas of this property not zoned or permitted for independent dwelling. I'm here to investigate. Lisa blinked. I have no idea what that's about. Sylvia crossed her arms. Try the folders labeled Studio Back Sublet and Garden Room Lease in the garage cabinet if they haven't moved them. The inspector's eyes flicked between them. Lisa stammered. Jeff was just, look, we didn't rent anything officially. The inspector raised a brow. Emails from your address were attached to booking inquiries. Payment logs were traced to your Venmo. Ms. Hammond, he turned to Sylvia, do you have a moment to walk me through the layout? Sylvia smiled, stepping into her shoes. With pleasure. Out back, the inn. Spector scribbled notes as Sylvia pointed to the detached garage and the converted garden suite, neither of which had ever been legally permitted for residential use. You'll notice the absence of a second egress, she noted, gesturing to a single narrow door. No fire alarm, no designated parking, and no plumbing inspections in years. Lisa hovered behind them, increasingly pale. When they returned to the front, the inspector reached into his satchel and removed a yellow and red adhesive notice. As of now, this structure is in violation. All tenant use must cease immediately. He slapped the sticker onto the garage door. Illegal dwelling. Cease use immediately. Lisa gaped. Wait, we can fix this, right? File something retroactively? Retroactive applications don't erase violations, the inspector replied, and they certainly don't excuse unauthorized rental income. Jeff came down the stairs as the inspector left, rubbing his eyes like he hadn't fully woken. What's going on? Sylvia walked past him, speaking low. Ask your wife how many rent checks she cashed. Later that evening, Sylvia retrieved a thick envelope from the mailbox. The return address read, Maple Hill HOA Dispute Committee, Inside, a printed complaint, filed by Lisa, claims of emotional harassment, unfair treatment, and a hostile living environment. Sylvia snorted softly. The audacity would have been laughable if it weren't so clumsy. She placed the packet on the kitchen table and picked up the phone. "Marianne," she said once the line connected, "can you draft a formal response? I'm going to include photos, the inspector's violation report, and, yes, those sublet leases." Marianne chuckled. "I'll make it so thorough, the HOA won't just drop the complaint. They'll wonder why Lisa's still on the block." 2 days later, Lisa returned home to find an official envelope on her bed. This one bore the county court seal. Inside, formal notice of eviction proceedings, filed by Sylvia Hammond. Grounds: abuse of residency agreement, unauthorized rental activity, and failure to comply with municipal housing codes. Lisa stood frozen at the threshold of her room, document trembling in her hands. From the hallway, Sylvia's voice rang out calmly. 30 days. That's the grace I'm giving you." Sylvia sets the table with 3 plates. 2 are paper, 1 is china. The smell of roasted rosemary chicken filled the kitchen, warm, nostalgic, precise. Sylvia placed a linen napkin beside the lone porcelain plate at the head of the table. Across from it, 2 paper plates rested on the floral vinyl runner. The distinction was intentional. Sharp, quiet, and sharp again. Lisa and Jeff arrived in tandem, both overdressed for a Wednesday. Lisa carried a forced smile like a glass ornament, brittle, polished. Jeff rubbed his neck and offered an awkward, "Smells great, Sylvia." Sylvia gestured toward the table without looking up. "Take your seats, I've already plated." The music playing from her old Bluetooth speaker was soft, jazz from her husband's collection. Ella Fitzgerald crooned in the background as the 3 sat down in silence, the only sounds coming from the delicate clinks of Sylvia's silver fork against china. Lisa's plastic cutlery cracked as she tried to slice her chicken breast. "I'm glad we're doing this," Lisa said, her tone tight around the edges. "Ending things like adults." Sylvia took a sip of sparkling water. "You mean with 1 foot out the door and the locks scheduled for change?" Jeff shifted in his chair. "We wanted to say thank you, and maybe clear the air, for everything." "Everything," Sylvia repeated softly, folding her napkin into a perfect square. She reached beneath her seat and laid 2 documents on the table. One was the notarized deed, the other, the eviction letter, newly updated with court stamps. Lisa's face dropped. "You brought paperwork to dinner?" "You brought sublets into my home," Sylvia replied calmly. "Let's not pretend we're the same kind of hostess." Jeff leaned forward. "You didn't even give us a chance to fix this." "You had chances," Sylvia said, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. "But you spent them filling the rooms with strangers and calling me furniture with a pulse." Jeff's mouth opened, then closed again. Lisa pushed her plate away. "So this is it? You're kicking out your own family? Just like that?" Sylvia didn't blink. "You built a life in my home. Now build one in your own." The room cooled with her words. Even the music felt quieter. Outside, the wind nudged a chime hanging from the back porch, its clinking soft, reverent, like applause from a ghost. Lisa crossed her arms. "And what do you want us to tell people? That we were evicted by a 71-year-old widow with a grudge?" Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her voice even but with a pulse of steel. "Tell them I finally started telling the truth." The air thickened. Jeff's fingers drummed against the paper plate, restless, aimless. Lisa picked at her napkin, eyes unfocused. Sylvia stood. She picked up her plate, the only one not disposable, and carried it to the sink. "No dessert?" Jeff asked, almost sheepishly. Sylvia glanced over her shoulder. "You've had enough." She rinsed the plate, dried it with a towel embroidered with her initials, S.H., and placed it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Lisa stood abruptly, scraping her chair against the tile. "You'll regret this when you're alone." Sylvia dried her hands. "You confuse silence with loneliness. I haven't been alone, I've been watching." Lisa faltered, then grabbed her coat from the hook by the door. Jeff followed, muttering something under his breath. Sylvia didn't stop them. The door closed. Not with a slam, but with a finality that echoed anyway. Sylvia walked back to the table and sat alone, staring at the 2 paper plates, still holding untouched food. Slowly, she folded the eviction letter and slid it into a file labeled Closure. In the quiet that followed, she whispered, "One more thing to clean." With every bag they packed, Sylvia grew a little taller. Lisa dragged a rolling suitcase down the hallway like it had personally betrayed her. Its wheels bumped over the entry rug as she muttered something under her breath about witchcraft and real estate revenge. Jeff followed, lugging boxes with marker-scrawled labels, books, misc, stuff from garage. None said, home. Sylvia stood at the back window, paintbrush in hand, stroking a new layer of dusty blue over the slats of her garden chairs. The sun was high, making the bristles glisten with each pass. She didn't glance back when the screen door slammed shut. Inside, passive-aggressive noise filled the house. Closet doors yanked open, hangers clacking, drawers dumped without care. Lisa's voice rose once, sharply. "She's doing this on purpose." Sylvia dipped her brush again. By the 3rd day, the kitchen felt lighter. Items vanished from shelves. Mismatched mugs, extra wine glasses, and unused fondue set Lisa had insisted on. Sylvia replaced them with her older, simpler things, a ceramic teapot, a blue and white china cup from her wedding set. On the 5th evening, a knock came, not from inside, but at the garden gate. It was Mrs. Alden, from 2 doors down, holding a small pot of fresh rosemary. "For your planter," she said. "Herbs do better when tended by someone who speaks kindly to them." Sylvia accepted the gift with both hands. "Thank you. I'd forgotten what kindness between fences sounded like." Over the next week, others followed. Harold from the corner with a homemade lemon bar wrapped in wax paper. A teenager she once tutored, now a young man, dropped off a note thanking her for her help with his college essay. They came not for gossip, but for her. One morning, Sylvia sat with her phone in her lap, thumb hovering over the screen. She opened the voice memo app. No one else would hear it, but she needed to say it aloud. "You stayed kind, you stayed quiet, but you didn't stay down," she whispered into the silence, the words more declaration than reflection. She saved it under the title, Proof. The house grew emptier with each box. Lisa's framed motivational prints came down. Hustle and heart now rested in a donation pile. Jeff's golf clubs leaned against the wall like they were waiting for an apology that wouldn't come. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Sylvia entered the kitchen and paused. A folded letter sat near the coffee pot, her name penned in Jeff's unmistakable slanted script. She didn't sit to read it. She stood. "Sylvia, this house meant something to us too. I know we handled things poorly. Lisa pushed and I didn't stop her, but I grew up in this kitchen. I hope you remember that. I hope you forgive us. Someday." Jeff, no grand apology, no offer to fix what was broken, just a plea, half wrapped in sentiment and the soft desperation of someone who'd never expected consequences. Sylvia folded the letter cleanly and slid it into a file marked closed. She didn't need to forgive, she just needed to protect what was hers. That evening, she walked down the now silent hallway and opened the guest suite, the one they had once called the back wing, as if it belonged to someone else. She ran her hand over the windowsill, then the built-in bookshelf Jeff had once said should be knocked out. Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "I think it's time," she whispered to the quiet room. The next morning, Sylvia met with Marianne and filled out a grant application to convert the guest suite into scholarship housing for caregivers finishing school or displaced by cost. No rent, just a key and a note on the door. This space was earned by grace, not claimed by entitlement. 1 month later, music fills the backyard, but this time every glass clinks in her honor. The late afternoon light draped Sylvia's garden like spun gold, pooling across the tops of her freshly painted chairs, catching on the rim of every champagne flute. The air smelled of peonies, rosemary, and lemon zest, flavors folded into the hors d'oeuvres resting on polished silver trays. Laughter threaded through the yard, low and genuine, the kind that needed no forced cheer to exist. But most striking of all, Every clink, every cheer, every toasting glass was for her. It was a different kind of gathering than the ones Lisa used to plan. No harvest brunch banner, no Pinterest-perfect centerpieces arranged by color theory. Just people. People who remembered, who showed up because they knew what it meant to be welcomed into someone's space, and to be seen. Sylvia stood near the garden arch, dressed in soft gray linen with a pin at her collar. Her late husband's cufflink turned into a brooch. Her hair, silver and carefully curled, shimmered in the sun. Around her, people moved in clusters, former students from the community college where she once taught economics, neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years until recently, and younger women in scrubs and badge lanyards, nurses and caregivers, brought together by the new initiative she had sparked. They called it the Grace House Project, though Sylvia always insisted she didn't need her name on anything, but the guests wouldn't have it any other way. "Excuse me, ma'am?" a young woman said, her voice hesitant but warm. She held a cupcake in one hand and a flyer in the other. "You don't know me? I'm Riley. My grandmother was one of your tenants a decade ago. I just wanted to say what you're doing. It's beautiful." Sylvia smiled, then reached out and gently touched Riley's arm. "Your grandmother used to make cinnamon tea and play gospel from that window right there," she said, pointing to a corner of the house. "She had the strongest backbone and the gentlest eyes I'd ever known." Riley blinked, clearly caught between surprise and tears. "Thank you for remembering her," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding me." As the sun dipped low, casting long amber streaks across the grass, Marianne took the makeshift stage. A small platform made of old wooden crates and a rug Sylvia had nearly thrown out during spring cleaning. The estate attorney had swapped her usual slacks for a flowing sundress, and yet she carried the same gravitas she always had in the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marianne began, raising a glass, "some people build empires, some build families, and some, like Sylvia, build sanctuaries. Tonight we honor her, not just for her generosity, but for her courage to reclaim what was always hers." Applause burst like fireworks. Sylvia's face warmed. She hadn't cried throughout the ordeal with Jeff and Lisa, not when they dismissed her, not during the eviction, not even when Jeff's half-hearted letter sat unopened for 3 days. But this reached something deeper. Marianne stepped down and handed her a small frame wrapped in tissue. Sylvia peeled it back slowly. Inside, a printed certificate with delicate lettering that read, "Deed of Title, Hammond Residence, Sole Ownership, Sylvia M. Hammond." And at the bottom, in Marianne's handwriting, the words, "Home, finally." There was no speech prepared. But Sylvia didn't need one. She turned to the crowd, the hush falling as if orchestrated. "I used to think silence was the only way to keep peace," she began. "But peace without recognition is just erasure. This isn't revenge, it's restoration. For every woman told to smile and stay out of the way, for every mother erased from her own table, this moment is yours too." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. A man near the back raised a hand. "Were you ever scared of being alone through all this?" Sylvia looked up, the oak tree behind her casting lacy shadows over her face. "Not after I heard myself speak." That night, as the guests dispersed and the sky bloomed into stars, Sylvia posted a single photo. It showed her sitting in her garden chair, the party twinkling behind her, glass raised in one hand, smile soft and earned. Caption, "Owned by Grace, and now by me." Legacies aren't passed down. They're protected. Sylvia sat at her kitchen table with her reading glasses perched on her nose, the hum of the early morning fan slicing softly through the silence. In front of her, the revised trust paperwork lay open. The final page, unsigned, waited like a breath held too long. The pen felt heavier than usual as she lifted it, not from hesitation but weight, of choice, of clarity, of all the names she'd once imagined writing down. Children, in-laws, distant cousins, all now absent. She signed it in one smooth motion. Sylvia M. Hammond. Below, in Marianne's neat legal print, read the new beneficiary, the Grace House Caregiver Housing Fund, a permanent trust, irrevocable. Next to the signature, Sylvia had asked Marianne to include a line in italics, a note not for courts or lawyers, but for those who might one day ask, why? For those who remember to invite the people who built the table. She sat back, closed the folder, and let the silence settle. It wasn't empty. It was earned. 3 weeks later, the letter came. Thin white envelope, no return address, but she knew the handwriting instantly. Slightly sharp loops, the lowercase g curling up at the end. Lisa. We're in a rough patch. Things haven't been easy since the move. I'm not writing to argue. Just wondering if we can talk. Maybe clear the air? Sylvia read it once. Then again, slower. She placed it on the counter beside a comment notification blinking on her phone. It was from Riley, the young woman who'd visited the fundraiser weeks earlier. Thank you for this home. I never thought I'd find a place like this while caregiving full-time. I'll keep the porch swept and the lights warm. Sylvia tapped the heart icon gently. Her thumb hovered for a moment over Lisa's message, but she didn't respond. The silence said enough. The first day Riley moved into the newly converted guest suite, she arrived with a single box, a battered suitcase, and a framed photo of her mother in hospice care. She placed it on the nightstand as if tucking her presence into the walls. Sylvia met her in the kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon toast filled the air. The younger woman wore soft sneakers and a shirt that read, "Fierce and tired." "I only brought what matters," Riley said shyly. Sylvia handed her a copy of the lease. "It's symbolic," she said. $1 per year. We'll call it rent, though I think you've already paid more than enough in this life." Riley blinked fast, nodded once, and then hugged her without asking permission. Sylvia let her. The embrace smelled faintly of lavender lotion and a future gently forming. The backyard felt different now, not in appearance but in atmosphere. Music floated from the open windows, not blasting, just brushing the air. Wind chimes danced gently over the herb beds. Sylvia's hands were dirt-streaked as she planted lemon balm near the fence line. Riley had mentioned her mother used to grow it for tea. Neighbors came by again, not with questions, but casseroles and garden cuttings. A few asked about the new arrangement. Sylvia explained it plainly. It's housing for caregivers, people who serve others and often can't afford to rest themselves. Most nodded, some teared up. One man from across the street said, "You turned your wound into a window." Sylvia smiled. "More like a door." One evening, while refilling the bird bath, she saw a group of young women laughing in the yard. Riley had invited a few fellow nurses for dinner. The table was mismatched, covered in woven placemats and dollar store candles, but it glowed. For the first time in years, Sylvia didn't flinch at the sound of celebration. She leaned against the garden trellis, watching from a distance, invisible but entirely present. Someone poured wine, someone clinked a glass. And in that clink, there was no exclusion. Just inclusion. Easy, natural, whole. She walked back inside, poured herself a glass of lemonade, and returned to her favorite chair under the oak tree, the same one Jeff once called junk. It had been sanded, painted seafoam blue, and now creaked in a familiar rhythm. The stars blinked open one by one as if in applause. She tilted her glass to the moon. The citrusy tang kissed her lips, cool and grounding. Sylvia closed her eyes, the laughter echoing behind her like a hymn. She whispered into the twilight, This is mine."